Hey neighbor, welcome back to the middle of a hurricane. My name is John, and it's time for a review of the 9th studio album For Those That Wish to Exist by the British metalcore band Architects. Architects are rugged veterans of the scene. After all these years together, formed back in 2004, they have quite literally seen everything under the sun, including the loss of a literal brother of the band founding member Tom Cyril. He was their primary lyricist, and his death actually kind of sparked me getting into this band. That might sound strange, but holy hell, was such an impactful, emotional, heart-wrenching moment of anguish. I couldn't help but fall in love with the music, the lyrics, and the bigger statement at hand that they can persevere through anything. Holy hell cemented the fact that I was an Architects fan. But as a fan, I had a duty to go back and check out some older material, some of which I liked, some of which I was a bit more passé on. But the album that I had previously kind of cooled my jets on and not been as keen to was All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us. That released in 2016, it was their final with Tom, and that now is something that I see as an extremely powerful statement, and one where I just wasn't paying attention to the words, which is half of what makes Architects Architects. Now with that in mind, I saw them approaching this new album, their 9th overall, with fresh eyes and obviously his brother Dan Cyril writing the lyrics now. It's definitely a little bit more global instead of internal, but I like the fact that there is the concern. These environmental themes have popped up in their music before, and the biggest question looming on my mind was, could they go 3 for 3 on an incredible 3-album run? Global destruction at the hands of humanity. That is always a fun topic to dive into, but Architects make it a pleasure. Of course, it's been done in the scene, and there's plenty of metalcore bands out there that are so generic and have kind of tapped into the whole let's save the world idea, but the lyrics haven't been there to back it up. I trust Architects a lot more when it comes to writing a song or an entire album that kind of captures the feeling of a doomsday, if you will, being right around the corner. Now, there are some more cliches on this album, a bit more than I would have hoped for, because holy hell, that was so intensely personal, there were so many demons flaring up, that it couldn't help but be unique to them, and not to say that For Those That Wish to Exist is really suffering in that department, but still. How do we hold ourselves responsible in the middle of a crisis, and even excluding the pandemic before that started in late 2019 into 2020, now experiencing it even more, the fallout in 2021, humanity still had a lot of problems. The doomsday clock was ticking closer to midnight. This album is relevant because people continue to not really give a fuck about anything other than themselves, and those that do care, it's fantastic, but I think this album deals with a lot of the frustration, a lot of the anguish, not only with ourselves and what maybe we could be doing differently, but with the world at large and the reckless leaders that are in place. Thematically, this album is on point. It rarely strays from the path of the message that it's trying to give to the listener, and what you choose to do with that, or if you even choose to pay attention to that over the music, that's up to you, but the music is also there for our entertainment and for our pleasure. I think this album has a lot of fantastic guitars on it, and that's not surprising because it is an Architects album. I really think that Josh Middleton has stepped up to the plate not only as a player, but also as a co-producer alongside Dan. Architects teased a reinvention of the band, of themselves, a breath of fresh air with this new LP. But I'm not entirely getting that, not to say that it was a misleading statement, it's just that it's not that often that it doesn't sound entirely like Architects. I think for some that's going to be a feeling of relief, like this is still the band that I fell in love with, because Sam Carter, while he's much more versatile and sings a lot more, and probably splits the duties down the middle when it comes to screaming and singing, it's still not all that different, but the times that they do crawl out on a limb and say they shoot for the moon on something like Flight Without Feathers, it generally works out pretty well. Despite some of the cliches that I mentioned earlier, I can't really fault the album all that much for having some of those moments to kind of fuel the fire and the intensity to get us riled up about the subject matter. I think that there are plenty of callbacks, some Easter eggs hidden in there that I think a lot of fans are going to appreciate, references to other other songs, other albums, even stuff off of Holy Hell. I think this album continues to progress some of those ideas, some of those themes. The drums feel very different on this album, but in a good way. It fits the music with the kind of hostility that really suits the subject matter. There are 3 vocal features on this album, and instead of the guests coming on and kind of making it their own world and trying to bring Architects over to them, Architects kept the heavy, and I really appreciate that. I mean, you've got Mike from Royal Blood, who's not necessarily known for being intense with the delivery, but his section definitely fits, although I wish it was longer. And then Simon Neil, a biffy Clyro, coming in on Goliath, an already mammoth tune, and then just knocking it out of the park with some really intense screaming. Color me impressed. I just got into that band last year, and this sells it even harder. For fans of their heavier style, fear not, because they definitely have you covered in spades. There's the previously released single Black Lungs, which is just venomous. It absolutely takes down its prey and gets its message across. The world is crumbling, things are changing, the youth are endangered, and the musicality of this track, it really adds a degree of tenacity that makes this song just not leave your head. There's also others like Discourse Is Dead, which I find to be very stern, very forceful in a good way, and towards the end of the album, they continue the pacing. There's a cut like Demigod that absolutely takes my breath away because it sounds like a Muse song in its intro, and then it just floors you with a sweeping hook. Don't count them out for 1-2s popping up all throughout the track list, because while we've already been able to enjoy tracks like Dead Butterflies, which is just incredible, I think one of their best songs ever, you also have Animals, which does get a little bit repetitive to me over time, but if I'm talking about that as being one of the weaker, per se, songs, then we don't really have that much of a problem. Slightly on the negative side, I guess I could bring up the fact that the Parkway Drive vocal feature doesn't really do a ton, and the lyrics on that breakdown are very sterile. It doesn't add much to the conversation, and it felt very predictable, although I do like the idea of Impermanence as a song. Also, towards the end of the album, the wah-ohs, the millennial whoop, or whatever you want to call it on Meteor, I thought that that was a little bit out of touch, but I don't really mind all that much because Sam Carter, he does sell it. There's urgency in the track. I love the guitars and drums there. It's not enough to make me fall out of love with it. Another one of my top favorites that I have to give credence to, An Ordinary Extinction, is phenomenal. I love how simple some of the lyrics are, but they really stick with you. We stood at the edge of the world while these blazing guitars are going. I love the intro. I love the fact that they incorporate electronics not only here, but in other places of the album too, which definitely does make it stand out as its own LP. Libertine, Scorched by Face Off, Giving Blood is just the perfect amount of tension and release, and then the closing track, Dying, is absolutely safe. It really opens up the vault up here. It gets the gears spinning, and what can I say? It's satisfying as hell. For Those That Wish to Exist is a gripping experience from start to finish. It's an album that definitely sees Architects maturing, evolving, even transcending metalcore in some places, but it's still realistically very much a heavy experience, both lyrically and in terms of the music. I love a lot about this, and even though I do see it as a slight step down from Holy Hell, that's an album that I would now give a perfect 5-star review to. So if that's a 5, For Those That Wish to Exist is a 4.5. Metalcore's best breakthrough story of the 21st century? Perhaps. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. Have you heard the album? Are you digging it as much as Holy Hell or All Our Gods? Let me know any and all thoughts. If you haven't seen my review of Holy Hell, then tap right here. Tap here for another recent rock or metal review, and all of my socials. You can find those stuffed away in the description down below. I'll be back soon for more on ARTV.